Good morning.
Good morning.
I thought I'd make up for not coming last week and be early this
Coming
week.
early.
Well,
Well,
you
you're
know
here.
why? You know why I didn't come at the wrong time, but that's okay. New day.
Well, you saw yesterday that we
No,
started to make the
No.
to make the announcement.
No, I know. I heard you.
Oh, yes. Hey, Martin,
Yes.
when we're done with this thing, can you help me get, I made my choir recordings, but I can't get them off the iPad reliably. And I could only go copy some of them, but not all of them, and I don't know why. Can you help me with that later?
You copy, one at a time, probably.
Well, I tried one at a time, even after.
I don't know. I've never actually tried to upload. I just saw how you do it. But I didn't
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah. All right, we'll talk later. I'll call you later.
Yeah, you're in the dark. You're in the dark.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, we have 5 people. And everybody see the Sue's slides here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Great. Hi, Ron.
Hi, Sue.
I ran into.
I tuned in.
I thank you for coming for this. I ran into Sarah last week, this past Tuesday.
I know. She wondered if you were still alive.
Alive and well and living in Paris. Not.
Sadly, that is a valid question these days.
I know. I know.
There's Ron Gelbart. He's here.
That's right.
Maybe I'll learn something.
Yeah. Ron, your email is heinz57@earthlink.net.
Yes, but I have a different email that you want to use.
Okay, go ahead.
It's, let me get it, see if I can find it. It's RONAA, there's 2 A's, LDGEK@gmail.com.
RNOAALDGEK
Copy of it. Do we have another one of these?
At Gmail.
at gmail.com. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you the quiz that we did last week, which has the answers. Since you missed our first class from this, we did a Proverbs quiz called What do you know? What do you already know about Proverbs? And I'll send you that, and that will bring you up to date with what's going on, okay?
Okay, you can send me anything.
All right, I'm going to do that right now.
Marcia and Al,
Yes.
you did a great job yesterday.
Oh, Al, yes. I was a support for him, though. I hope you saw how I was dutifully sitting there, and
Here I am.
You were. I was impressed.
I was
For some
impressed
reason.
too.
Yeah, you probably hadn't done it in a while, so it looked good. But you always, I wish I could do that. I just.
Well, thank you. Just got to start somewhere and just keep working it and just keep doing it, I guess. I don't know.
Well,
You do it enough times. And
I wish.
Suzanne, you know, with a good teacher, you can do anything. You really can. So, you know, if you're really interested in doing that,
87 or 88 times. I'm not sure how many.
with a teacher.
Yeah.
No, it's really important to have a good teacher. I'm very pro teacher.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
I don't know why you would think that.
I don't know why. I don't know why.
Suzanne, it's only strange the first 100 times.
Yeah.
Oh, I've still got a few more. You know, though, I think Diane George said I could do this. I'm thinking of doing the adult bat mitzvah at Beth Yeshua, and hopefully it'll be in person next year, even though I don't know the Hebrew. So we'll see. I hope it can be in person.
You don't need to know the Hebrew to join a bat
No.
mitzvah. Just
I could have
saying.
done it 2 years ago with, last year with Glory.
Hey, Suzanne, you're very dark.
I know.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, better. Well,
It's about the best wait a minute. It's about the best it's going to get.
okay.
You need a lamp behind you.
I do have one more thing to report. Actually, one more came through.
I had to find a lighter spot for the recording music for the high holidays.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi.
I noticed for this you're in the kitchen, but for Shabbat you guys are in like your living room or something, the more formal spot.
Yes.
And your husband's in China.
Yeah, we were told that we don't want in shul to be viewed to be in our kitchen.
No, it's not that. We just wanted, we have the more formal setting. If you could see, you would see we still have our Shabbat tablecloth from last night on the table. But I'm still drinking my coffee,
Oh, that reminds me, I got to go and get mine.
Although
I drink
Sue-
coffee in class anyway, so.
Yeah.
Hey,
Renee,
Sue,
how are you
you've been
doing
up for-
today?
What?
Renee, how are you doing today?
Seen from last time.
Good for you. Good.
File
Thanks
somewhere.
for
Who
being
we got? Hey, good morning, Ron.
with Eric
Been here
and,
before.
and Peter. Look at all these.
Peter with the books. Hey, I have books too.
Well, you need to show them, Debbie. We don't believe you.
Okay.
Peter, I believe.
behind you.
Debbie, mm-mm.
Hold them up. Hold them up.
All of them? They're
All
very
the books. Hold up the books. Okay,
On
we're
one
at
foot.
8:29. We'll wait another couple minutes to admit people.
And
We're
everybody-
now into this admitting people.
Yeah.
Sue, you're on mute.
No,
No, you're not.
I've unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, just give me a
Yes.
second.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I think it's a great idea for the presenter to unmute themselves.
Peter, I second that.
Yes.
I was on something last week from this where the speaker was muted for like, and everybody's like sending messages and screaming from this, and for some reason he's not paying attention. And it's like 10 minutes in, and we're all doing this.
They sent the police to his house
And then really, it was
doing a welfare check.
yes.
How about this could be the universal symbol? We can't hear
Look
you.
at all these people. This is great.
Hey, Peter, I had a question for you. Are you in your course on language, which you're going to start sometime late this year? Are you going to talk about the use of them as a singular?
I could, of course, but it's
Says he, I better go find out about that.
When the presenter, it's good for the presenter to unmute. Daniel, that's Daniel, Debbie.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm going to mute my wife because Daniel has just called.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please do.
Peter, miss seeing your wife.
oh, where was that?
No, I miss seeing her.
Oh, well,
In general.
she misses everybody as well. She's not part of the Proverbs group, or part of the, she shows up for some, I know.
She can be.
I know.
I mean,
No pressure.
no pressure. Hi, Etta.
Morning.
So I'm going to make you a co-host,
Oh, great. Okay.
just in case.
Seth. Stephen Baker's here. Look at all these people. Wow.
I know.
So you want to start, Sue? I'm going to mute everybody. They can unmute if they want to talk.
Okay, that works
So I'm
for me.
muting you on. It'll knock you off, and then I'll put you back on.
Okay. Okay, then. Well, good morning, and thank you for all coming back for a little more torture on the Proverbs front. This is part 2. Martin, if you'll advance to the next slide, please. From this, just to remind you about the dates that will be coming up. From this, today we're going to be talking about some of the origins of Proverbs. August 16th, we're going to look at selected Proverbs. The September 27th has an asterisk because this is going to kind of fall in between the high holidays. So I'm going to talk to Martin and some other people. We may just combine the class and end it in August because the high holidays mostly work on the weekends. So we'll see how this is all going to work. I hope all of you brought a Tanakh or another book about Proverbs. You're going to need that for this class and for the subsequent classes. And for next month, we're also going to need a Siddur because we can look at that from this. Following Proverbs and some of the Siddurs may be a little bit easier. So with that said, don't walk away, Martin, not yet. If you'll advance to the next slide, please, wherever you are. Hello, there you go.
I had to get my Tanakh.
Oh, okay. To review, as Margaret Cho's mother would say, Proverbs was written and edited by many, attributed to King Solomon, is written in his middle years. We'll be talking a little bit about that today. It was found in the Hebrew Bible between Psalms and Job, which we'll also sort of be discussing from this because there is some teeny Mishnah dispute about that. Various opinions on the period of time when Proverbs was written, although they have solidified one particular period that they know that Proverbs was edited. It was influenced by ancient writings outside of Judea, from this, which will be the subject of most of our talk today. Found throughout Jewish rituals and daily and Shabbat prayers, but heavily quoted in Pirkei Avot, which we'll be talking about in our final classes, and that were fragments found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this probably covers everything that we talked about in the first class. Is there anything that you think that I missed that we need to review again?
So Sue, the comment you make about various opinions on the period of time, blah, 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 you could say that about Psalms, you could say that about a lot of stuff, right?
Exactly, from this. However, from this, as we will learn today, there is one particular section of Pirkei Avot that people have actually put a date on that from this, but we'll be talking about that in just a few minutes. Anything else? Okay, let's move on. So just as we discussed when I did the class on Psalms, when the rabbis in the Talmud discussed where Psalms needed to be placed in the Tanakh, not so much this time when talking about Proverbs, but they do discuss the authorship of particular books in the Talmud, including Proverbs and the other Solomonic writings. So for the rabbis, as you will see, this is sort of an all hail Hezekiah. Why? Because he was an inheritor of Solomon's kingdom, albeit several hundreds of years later, and he was an authoritarian advocate for study, as you will see in the next slide. Yeah. So what did Hezekiah do to ensure Torah study? He inserted a sword at the entrance of the study hall and said, anyone who doesn't engage in Torah study will be stabbed with the sword. And apparently there's some truth to that from this, that at least there was the threat that you would be stabbed if you didn't do any kind of study from this. So why do you think Hezekiah from this was a big promoter of this? I'll take some answers from people.
Unmute yourself if you want to talk.
You know, I'm not sure whether it was Hezekiah or whether it was the author of this particular passage.
That the authors did what? put a sword in the study hall?
Well, no, that
About
they
the
put
threat?
their own feelings in the words of Hezekiah.
Ah. Well, who was Hezekiah?
King,
King of what?
maybe the north.
He was the inheritor of the Solomonic,
South.
Now the southern, wasn't he the southern kingdom?
albeit he was several hundreds of years later. Yes, but from this, what was happening at the time of him is that they were trying to get back together again. So it was very important for him to have an establishment of where he, Hezekiah, would fit into all of this, which is why he was a huge promoter of the Solomonic writings, and a huge promoter of a lot of the prophets, even the ones from this in the kingdom that he was not originally part of. From this, and so from this, I mean, he really apparently education during his period became compulsory for men and for women, from the old and the young. From this, and he wanted everyone to be very highly educated. From this, as you see also at the end, from this is that they searched around for this, and all these people were supposed to be experts on all of these issues about halakha, from this and so forth. Now, this is an important statement, Sanhedrin 94b, because this for Rashi is the proof text about the importance of Proverbs in the next slide.
So a question about this, you're talking about the mid Second Temple period?
Yes.
And so when we're talking about ritual purity and impurity at that point, are we talking about the temple? Are we talking about Nida? Are we talking about women? Are we talking about everything?
That is a whole other section in Sanhedrin that talks about all of that. But I just wanted to focus mostly on just this one statement because of Rashi.
Because it's a whole tractate in the Talmud called Nida. Right?
Exactly, from this, and everybody needed to know all about all of this at that point.
So what years are we talking about specifically when Hezekiah ruled? Do we know the period, the years?
Yes, we do, and we'll be talking about that very shortly.
Okay.
Okay.
Sue,
I
Sue,
just
I have
wanted,
a
Yes.
quick question. You've explained how that education was so important to Hezekiah. Would you state again exactly why he was pushing it so much?
He needed to establish himself in the Solomonic hierarchy. From this,
but what does that mean? Why was that important to him?
It gave him legitimacy from this to do things for the temple. It gave him legitimacy to do things for bringing together a united Israel. Because as you know, from this following Solomon's reign, shortly after that is when the kingdom.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. Because of the exile.
This is sort of like saying, let's say in the years to come, we have what might be called another commander-in-chief, and that person would set everybody in all of the states and in all of the counties to study the Constitution, so that we should all become experts in how things are supposed to be.
So it's based on the past experience of a complete fiasco, and we're going to build on that. Is that what you're saying, Debbie? Kind of?
I'm sort of saying we all need to know what our founding principles are.
Yeah, and
so
that was just a random example. Gotcha.
Yes,
Thank you.
okay.
I'll mute myself. Thank you.
And just assume that the other thing, Solomon built the first temple, but Solomon also is purported to have written the Proverbs, so it kind of all fits together, right?
Well, did he?
I don't think he did.
That's what we will be discussing. Okay, let's go to the next slide from this. So this is the proof text on Proverbs about what it was that happened from this. So Rashi is citing back to Sanhedrin from this about what it was that Hezekiah did. That when he was appointed king, he expounded upon them, that is Solomon's Proverbs, and placed disciples in every city, basically making Proverbs as well as other Solomonic writings mandatory in education. And when he uses the term from this maintained, that is he'etiku, from this is translated often as copied. Okay? So what does that mean from this when he talks about that? You know, are we still in the all hail Hezekiah thing from this? Because when you're copying something, you're copying it exactly. Some of the other commentators, for this, many of whom we talked about last week, we are on the next slide, had some differing opinions about this from Rashi. So even Ezra sort of agreed with Rashi from this in saying it was all done by Solomon, and that Hezekiah's men from this copied it down. Ralbag, who we also talked about last week from this, he opens the door to the possibility that it wasn't Solomon alone, that there were other influences. And his commentary in particular was very deeply criticized for even suggesting the idea that what Hezekiah's committee did wasn't Solomon verbatim. He got a lot of flack for this, among the other things that he wrote. And even Nachmias is walking a very fine line between human memory and what God's role is in Proverbs. And if you turn to Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, it reads basically, the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. So who was it who really did it from this? Was it in fact all Solomon? Was it a little bit of Solomon sprinkled in with some other things? Was it exactly Solomon as committed to memory from this? Or was it, did Hezekiah's committee take some liberties with this? Was it in fact divine revelation that inspired Solomon to write this? From this, again, from this, the commentators are kind of all over the place on this, from this, which makes us a little bit all over the place on this, a little bit confusing. Any questions about this thus far?
I just want to point out, I just looked at chapter 25 out of curiosity.
Yes.
It says, okay. And it says, chapter 25, verse 1, these two are the Proverbs of King Solomon, which were copied by the men of Hezekiah.
That is correct.
Equal. Right. So these two, these also.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I have to say is I see that sentence which suggests that somebody is claiming that King Solomon is also the author of this.
Right, and this is a perfect, from this segue into our next section about how Proverbs is divided. Just as Psalms was divided, when we discussed it, into 5 different books, so Proverbs, according to the way that the rabbis understood it, is also divided into 5 parts or 5 books. So part 1 takes us from Proverbs 1 through 9 from this, and is attributed as the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel. Okay. Peter writes, I note that Kugel seems to feel that Proverbs represents a relatively late concept of the divinity. I want you to hold that thought because we want to talk about that sort of at the end. Okay. Thank you for that, Peter. The second part from this is basically 3 different sections, of which the section that is bolded is the one that we're going to concentrate on the most today. So they're noted as the wise sayings of Solomon, the sayings of the wise, and from this, and then this, these are also the sayings from this. So these are clearly divisions, just as when we discussed Psalms, that the word Selah indicated that there was a break in the way that things needed to be looked at. From this, that we were entering a different prayer or a different part of Psalms at that point. So from this, these are also divisions that you will see as we go through this. The next slide, please. Part 3 is again from this, these are the other Proverbs, and this is the only section, the section of Proverbs 25 through 29, that most scholars agree was written during the period of King Hezekiah in 700 BCE. And this is the only section for this for which everybody has agreed that we can actually put an actual date on this. How they did this from this that's another whole thing from this, but this is the only section from this for which we can actually put a date on this.
Kugel seems to date things by saying what language did they use? Did they use which version of Hebrew? What Aramaic words did they stick into things, and so on, to figure out when these things might have been written?
You're right from this. But so we'll take a look at that from this a little bit later.
Okay.
And the parts 4 and 5, part 4, which is in the purple, is called the words of Agur. Part 5 is the words of Lemuel that we talked about last week, is possibly a name of endearment used by Solomon calling himself Lemuel. And finally, the ideal wise woman from this, who may or may not have been Bathsheba, may or may not have been one of Solomon's wives. We're not entirely sure from this, but this is how Proverbs ends in the section from this of chapter 31. So there are a total of 31 chapters in Proverbs.
Unmute yourself, Al.
Yes,
Al. Yeah. Okay, hey, so I'm trying to clarify exactly when King Hezekiah was in business. So here it says 700 BCE, so that'd still be the first temple period, not the second temple period, right?
700?
Yeah, because the expulsion was 586, the first expulsion.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. You're right. No, but this is the only section from this that the scholars have said this is where the writings came from during this period.
So are these wrong? I mean, in other words, is there other evidence that said King Hezekiah was in reign during the second temple?
Second temple.
Oh my gosh. Can someone
we need
else
to check on that? Yeah.
I was going to say, can you check
Okay,
that?
Al, are you thinking that because of the requirement to study that people were trying to get back together? Because the northern and southern kingdoms separated way before the destruction of the first temple.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that could be this, but I thought we were talking about after second temple period earlier, but maybe.
Well,
the second temple period, there was no kingship. They were under Persian rule, and then, the Greek.
Yeah, but second temple period is after the initial destruction, obviously.
Right, but there were no kings. There were no kings then, except for Herod, until you finally get king. Well, the Maccabean kings and Herod, but that was.
Okay, so he must have been there during the first temple then. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Next slide, please. So Proverbs is considered in a genre of called wisdom literature. Wisdom literature was a big thing in the Near East, and when people talk mostly about wisdom literature, they're mostly talking about things that are Bible related from this, but there was wisdom literature, as we'll see in just a moment, in other parts of the Near East. Some generalities about wisdom literature is that they were statements of sages, and they talked about virtue, divinity, community standards. They were often oral traditions placed in written form, which we will see when we talk about the Sumerian and Akkadian wisdom literature. They were often poetic in tempo, that when you read them from this, they seemed to follow some kind of a meter that may have been very prevalent from this in the particular language from this of where the wisdom literature was being written. They were basically in two groups. They were either practical and utilitarian, or they were speculative and pessimistic. From this, practical and utilitarian, from this, just some prudent guidelines, like make sure your checkbook is balanced, from this kind of a thing. but the speculative and pessimistic from this got into what is the meaning of life? Why do bad things happen to good people? Where can wisdom be found? And Proverbs kind of walks the line between both the practical and utilitarian and the speculative and pessimistic, and sometimes all within the same paragraph. So that's a generality about what wisdom literature is. Wisdom literature has been around for more than 4,000 years. Was there a question?
Yeah, I had one too.
Yes.
For what everything you said on this slide, you could say about Aesop's fables. Are we talking about the same type of things? You know, here's a story, here's a poem about what you should do. Isn't this the same for Aesop's fables?
What is the conclusion of Aesop's fables? The moral of the story is, that makes a difference. That makes it not wisdom literature.
Does Aesop's fables have God in them?
No.
I think that would be a difference.
Okay.
That could be that's a huge difference from this, as far as making the difference, because we talked about that last week about whether Aesop's fables from this is related in any way to Proverbs. It may have been influenced by Proverbs, but it was not. And it was also written from this in Rome, from this under Roman rule, from this, and hundreds and at least several hundreds of thousands of years after Proverbs came to be from this. So there may have been a tie from this, just as we will see about the Akkadian, the Sumerian, and the Egyptian influences on Proverbs. So Proverbs then may have had an influence on Aesop as well.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Any comments? Okay. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Hold on just a second. And okay, next, yeah. Okay, so as we talked about last week from this, there were three major influences on Proverbs, possibly five. We talk about him listening to, excuse me, listening to people in the court, about the influence of his mother from this. But most scholars for this agree from this that there was some form of wisdom literature that may have seeped into Proverbs from this and may have had an influence on not only Proverbs but other Hebrew writings. The first one we want to talk about is the Sumerian wisdom literature from this in what is called the Instructions of Shuruppak. From this, that came in the form of cuneiform tablets dating about to 2000 BCE, and the tablets that they have recovered have had both epics and myths, hymns and laments, and proverbs and the wisdom literature. From this, it has been mostly done in fragments. From this, and what they found were they were mostly fables with morals. From this, what some of the most famous one being the bird and the fish, which is an argument about how Shamash, the god from this of the Sumerians, from this created the bird and the fish, and how it is that they worked together and how they didn't, and how in a conflict that Shamash had to come in and take care of the dispute, and then made the bird go off and do one thing and made the fish go off and do something else from this, so that they would always be in sort of harmony but also in conflict for the rest of their lives, so the story goes. That being the moral of the story. But also in there were the proverbs from this, where Shuruppak gave instructions to his son from this, where it is clear from this that he had at least a child from this, to whom from this the kingdom was then going to go from this. And these are some examples that you see on the slide about things that you should not be doing, including, like, for example, do not answer back against your father, and don't raise a heavy eye. That is basically, don't give him the stink eye.
This sounds like Confucius as well, right? Is this kind of stuff?
Very much from this, and may have even sort of dated almost to the same period, possibly. Not so much from this. Does everybody knows where Sumeria is, right? Anybody not know? Sumeria from this was a part of the Babylonian region from this, and excuse me, and from this was in the area from this is sort of near the city of Ur. Oh, city of Ur, who came from the city of Ur?
Abraham.
There you go. And this, so it's all from this same general area. Any question about our Sumerian wisdom literature? Okay, let's move on. Now, the Akkadian wisdom literature came in the form called the Council of Wisdom. The Council of Wisdom came from roughly the same period as the Sumerian tablet. From this, most of the council was practical. Here's one of the famous statements from this is, and see if this may trigger something. You shouldn't locate a field in a road. You shouldn't make a well in your field. People will damage it, and people will cause damage on it for you. Sound familiar? Not necessarily in Proverbs, but in Leviticus. Wisdom of like, don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Okay. Some of them were moral precepts followed by negative practical results. For example, one of the writings says, you shouldn't play around with married young women. The slander could be serious. Then there's community opinion and the possibility of slander that plays a major role, especially when you go to the marketplace or to the courtyard, whereas what's written is insults and stupid speaking receive the attention of the land.
So not only is it very practical, but it's practical that if you didn't know that it came from something quite so ancient, you would say, this is something that could have been written yesterday. It is things that have continued through the ages. And I think that's what makes some of this still resonate for us.
Well, not only that, thank you for pointing that out, Suzanne, and not only that, from this, it's interesting that someone had felt that they had to write it down. That this wasn't something that obviously that came naturally. It's not exactly a commandment, but it is trying to guide people, individuals and communities in how to be respectful, how to do things right. And what we have in front of you on the slide from this are two examples from Proverbs versus the Council of the Wisdom from this, and what it is that they say from this, to see that there is some similarity in what is being written from this. The Proverbs one on the left, he who guards his mouth and tongue guards himself from trouble. Counsel of the Wisdom, tame your tongue and watch your speech. Dignity to a gentleman means keeping your opinions precious.
So,
same thing, yes.
It seems to me that we have to think about, since most of the population, especially women, were not literate in most of these times, these were like, if they were written down, who would say them, like in the marketplace days or in the houses of worship or something? The priests would be involved in saying these things that were written down?
No, these were not written specifically for the temple. They were not part of any kind of worship from this. It was, these came from the king from this as a way of guidance, apparently like in the Sumerian case, to his son from this, as we see in Proverbs, where there's reference to the father saying to the son, these are things that you should do, but these were generally to, I guess, to the community.
So these were oral tradition passed down from generation to generation, but somebody felt the need to write them down officially.
Right. And that's in some ways what Proverbs has done as well. From this is taking something that may have been oral from this and putting it in writing. You know, you're hearing.
And you think that was just for historical preservation reasons?
Maybe it was just to have some kind of a guide from this for future, for future generations to say, you know, people are committing adultery from this, and you shouldn't be doing that, and this is why. From this, but not to say thou shalt not commit adultery. Just saying, if this is what you're going to do, these are the consequences that you will face from this. I mean, doesn't it just make good sense?
Yeah, they're all common sense kind of things. That's why I was hoping that by, you know, not just by proclamation, but like you said, they would have to read it to people, as Ezra did, and other people in the marketplace, so they could get these messages of wisdom taught to them. Not everybody had, you know, stelae at home in their hut or whatever.
No, they didn't from this. And if they did have stelae in other homes from this, that would be a great archaeological find from this, because they've only found like one part, and only that in small sections. From this. So this is an example of the Akkadian wisdom literature. So do we have any questions about the Akkadian Sumerian literature before we go on?
Well, is Akkadian, I'm trying to remember my ancient history, is Akkadian after Sumer lost its power?
No, it was all roughly during the same period from this. And the Sumerian one was actually written before the Great Flood.
Right, yeah, right.
Oh, the Great Flood. Does that ring any bells to anybody?
Yeah.
It should.
Yeah, I remember studying that with Professor Shalom Paul, but I just was trying to remember if the Akkadians were actually located nearby, or they were just in timeline after the Sumerian fall. You know,
they were physically in the general area. They were not wiped out apparently during the flood from this, but the writings from this are generally dated to about the same period. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, let's move on. This is the part that I want to concentrate on the most from this, because this is where there has been some interesting controversy from this, and a lot of people who also say, oh, this is absolutely 100% where this came from. And it's called the Instruction of AMENEMOPE from this. So AMENEMOPE lived in the late New Kingdom of Egypt during the reign of Amenemop III. From this, I want to talk to you about him at the end of this. It was placed on papyrus. It is 31 chapters of proverbs and statements. It was discovered by and obtained in Egypt by E. Wallace Budge on behalf of the British Museum in 1888. And that is where the papyrus rests even today, where people come from all over the world to study. It was then authenticated by a number of people, but most particularly by Adolf Ehrman, who was considered at that time in the 1920s the dean of Egyptologists, who was also working on behalf of the British Museum from this. And he is important because he was one of the first people to say there is a direct correlation between the instruction of AMENEMOPE and Proverbs. No question, according to Adolf Ehrman. However, he had his detractors as well and his supporters. So if you go to the next slide from this, so the two sources that I've used to discuss our next section from this come from Wim van den Dugen and from John Ruffel from this. So as you'll see from den Dugen from this is that he absolutely is on the side along with Ehrman from this. And he wrote the following. I'm going to read the full thing that he wrote. The remark of Budge from this, the one who discovered the papyrus, pertaining to the influence of the teaching on Jewish religious literature, was taken up and confirmed by Adolf Ehrman, Sette, Griffith, and Simpson in 1926. Miriam Lichtheim in 1976 in her book, Ancient Egyptian Literature, speaks of a consensus among scholars that there is no priority of the Hebrew text nor a common lost Semitic text, but a literary relationship between the teaching of Amenemopes and the book of Proverbs, the oldest part of which is dated circa 920 BCE, namely chapters 10 to 24. She writes, it can hardly be doubted that the author of Proverbs was acquainted with the Egyptian work and borrowed from it, especially Proverbs line, chapter 22, verse 21, speaks in that sense and introduces the Hebrew section on the words of the wise. I have written down 30 sayings for you. They contain knowledge and good advice, excuse me, and will teach you what the truth really is. Then, when you are sent to find it out, you will bring back the right answer. That is all, chapter 22, verse 21 in Proverbs. And that for her was the proof text, absolutely, that this is the teaching, and this brings it all together. One cannot exist without the other. Now, Ruffle does not agree and wrote a 70-page treatise about this where he went through Proverbs and went through the instruction of Amenemopes line by line with huge criticism about, first of all, how it was that people misinterpreted everything that Amenemopes had done for this, translated it wrong, did all these terrible things. And then we get into the Hebrew part from this, for which I'm not sure that he was really a very knowledgeable Hebraist, may have worked with somebody on some of the things, but writes the following in the end of his treatise. The parallels that I have drawn between them, meaning Proverbs, and ancient Near Eastern wisdom are in no way exhaustive, but the fact that they can be produced so easily underlines what should be obvious anyway, that such precepts and images are universally acceptable, and hence that similar passages may occur in Proverbs and Amenemopes simply by coincidence. So, who's right? The next slide. We're going to decide. Was it borrowed or is it coincidence? So let's take a look at a comparison of Proverbs and the instruction of Amenemopes in some of the things that Ruffle from this talked about. Okay? So here are our first two sets of comparisons from this, and you can follow through with this. I took as much of this as I could from JPS. Peter writes, there is always the possibility that there is a common source which is no longer available. Well, can you expound on that a little bit, Peter?
Sure.
Okay.
You find, for example, that there are similarities, let's say, between German and English. You could say, well, English borrowed from German or German borrowed from English, but in linguistics, we posit a common source called Proto-Germanic, and the proto means it's no longer there. But very often linguists have posited something in a proto-language and then found it somewhere, even though originally it was only posited. So that's, that's the linguist in me.
Ah, okay. Okay, so related to this, then how would that be from this?
It could be that the author of Proverbs did not borrow directly from Amenemope, but in fact, they both had access to a common source.
Okay. They're both Amenemope from this, who wrote thousands of years before Solomon, and even more thousands of years before Hezekiah from this, had something else that happened? Had some other influence?
There might have been another document. Now,
okay.
if there was enough distance between them, then it's probable borrowing from Amenemope, but what could look like coincidence could in fact come from a common source that they both had access to.
Okay. Okay.
It's just a thought.
If you could take note from what Sandra said before, which is that people couldn't read, so somebody was declaiming the stuff or telling them the stuff in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. Isn't it possible that a lot of the stuff was just sort of in the air? And then some people wrote it down, and maybe somebody Egyptian wrote the stuff down, and it may not have been from a source, but it was just around.
Okay. Okay. This one, and Janice writes, they all seem to be written from the desire to bequeath a spiritual legacy to the next generation. Possibly from this. It may also be in some ways where Amenemope might have been writing down things that the king, the pharaoh at that time said. For what purpose, we're not entirely sure. From this, he's given the full credit for having written the 31 verses, the 31 chapters for the 30 chapters of the instruction from this. So we're not entirely sure. But these are here before you two examples from this. Is this the real thing from this, or is it real or not?
Well, look what we have here. We have the concepts of rich people and poor people. We have the concepts of boundary stones.
Okay.
So there is a culture in the Middle East with things like boundary stones and respecting your ancestors. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that the reason, perhaps, scholars sometimes get all bent out of shape about what we would see as minor things, but I think the edge here is there something truly unique and God-given about what's in the Bible as opposed to what's in all of these other cultures?
And also for this, it's very important to point out from this, in this portion of Proverbs from this, there is no reference to God.
Okay. Okay, but what I'm saying though is there's an agenda in these arguments, which is the Bible is not original. Other people said it first. My sense is people can, disagree. Well, tell me if you disagree. That's what all this is about. That's the agenda.
The agenda that certainly is Ruffles' agenda from this is that this was all coincidence, and this was all happening roughly, maybe not exactly the same time, but it's still there.
Look,
but it's everybody's agenda though, because if it did exist in Egypt 1,000 years earlier, then did Solomon just know it because he was wise, or knew the cultures?
Okay, look, as a sociologist, having studied a little bit of anthropology, most cultures, yes, we're very different around human development, but we're talking about, yes, Egypt's a different place than Mesopotamia geographically, but we're also talking about, long traditions that traveled among humans. And so these kind of sociologically, bent how to live in a society, like don't take advantage of weak people because that's immoral, even if they have slaves and even if they have other things, is a kind of sociological bent of what we have that's remaining. we also have lots of horrible written things that people did to other people from time immemorial till today. Right. So I don't think that we have to really kind of, I mean, yes, it's a guess because we don't know exactly how it was transmitted from A generation to Z generation, but these are not things that are, you know, if you look at Confucius, if you look at other things, people had to communicate what they thought was going to be sociologically, you know, the rules of human behavior.
Right. Suzanne,
Sue, if I can interject here.
First Suzanne and then you, Eric.
Just a quick thing. As I'm listening to this, particularly listening to Sandra, coincidence and borrowing in many cases can be the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Right.
So I think, you know, we are talking about things, we didn't know that people traveled, but obviously they did to a certain extent.
Yes.
Okay.
Nothing is completely separate.
All right.
Yes.
Sorry, Eric.
Yes, Eric.
Yes, and one particular means of travel was the time of Amenemope seemed to coincide with the Exodus.
No.
Well, 1300 BCE.
Roughly.
Yeah.
Even again, from this, that's.
And if these, if these traditions were long-standing, that could be a means of transmission.
Friedman would have a real hard time with you right now.
It's all right. No, I mean, even if it was brought over by the Levites.
All right, but if you also think about the period of Solomon, what was the period of Solomon, of the reign of Solomon? It was very international, right? There was a lot of trade was going on. It was an era of a lot of peace. It was an era of a lot of building, so that of construction, so that brought in a lot of trade from this.
Right.
And, you know, all the thousands of wives notwithstanding from this. So there's that. Martin, well, I'm going to go to the next slide from this to another comparison. Again, from this, you know, borrowing, coincidence, uniqueness. You know, what exactly are we doing? All right. I have 2 more slides about that, and then I have some surprise slides. Okay, next one. Mm-hmm. This is one of my favorite ones from this is about not overeating from this, especially when you're in the presence of a ruler. Does anybody have a question? And when we can just go. Sorry, go ahead.
In reading all of this, if I put aside all who borrowed from who and who did this, if I'm going to have a society and it not be in chaos, aren't these the rules I want in this society, regardless if they're in China or in the Middle East?
I'm sorry for this. As a Jewish person, all those commandments, that wasn't enough?
Well, the commandments came later. But I'm saying, as a society, this is what they did. In the Torah, it codified it. It didn't say, hey, this is in order for our society, you know, not to be in chaos. God now is commanding you to do all these things.
Well, and just as the commandments were way before Proverbs, so way before that. And the next slide, Martin. Okay. So you see that, you see again from this, you know, and maybe it's just coincidence that it's all, you know, everybody's on the same page about, you know, what they're thinking about when they talk about all of these things. What I also thought was very interesting was, let's take a look at Amenemope and the Shema. Coincidence? Possibly.
Nah.
Nah. You don't think so? We're heading into the high holidays. Let's see what Amenemope had to say about that. That's
okay, well, first of all,
yes,
this is right up Friedman's alley, I would think. You know, that this was somehow brought from Egypt to us.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let's talk about Amenemope and the high holidays. Next slide. Does this sound a little bit familiar to the high holidays? Yeah.
The rabbis did a hell of a good job of convincing us, didn't they?
Convincing us of what?
That all of this was holy and given just to us.
Was it? So I want to leave you with this little tidbit. So Amenemope from this wrote during the period of the reign of Amenemope III from this, who was part of the I believe it was the 20th dynasty of the New Kingdom. So who was this guy, Amenemope III? Most people from this who know the opera will know that he was the father of Akhenaten. Amenemope III was the child of one of his father's many wives. He was the second born son of his mother. From this, he had a firstborn brother who died under very tragic circumstances. He took over the throne from his father, who had sought to unite Egypt at a time when it was divided and had waged numerous wars. Amenemope III reigned for 40 years during a time of extensive international expansion, Egyptian trade and wealth. He was a master architect who built the Temple of Karnak and many palaces. And one of the things that he was well known for is that he decorated his palaces and the temples with stones that came from literally all over the world, where when they brought in, he categorized them, weighed them, and made an inventory of where they were, where they came from, where they were going, what he felt was the significance of that. Does any of that sound familiar? To somebody who reigned for 40 years with a period of great wealth and international trade?
Okay, so you're saying Solomon?
I am.
Yeah.
And there are lots of archaeologists and others from this who have made the claim through the years that that is in fact Solomon.
Oh, cool. So Akhenaten, he was the father of Akhenaten?
Yes.
The first monotheist, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that kind of pulls it together.
Uh-huh. From this, and one of the other things that Amenemope III from this was doing during that period was assisting in the writing of the Book of the Dead.
Whoa, yes.
Which is a very, very important document from this for the Egyptians, from this, where it finally would have put in writing the full the full array of what it was that the priests did when someone died. From this, of how the body was mummified, how the body was handled, about talking about the ceremony of the weighing of the heart. From this, and I don't know if most of you know about this. From this, is that the heart was kept in the body. From this, while other organs were taken out, placed in jars, in the canopic jars, and buried along with the person. The brain was removed. These organs were kept. The heart was kept in because from this, the gods would come and take the heart out and would weigh the heart on a scale against a feather. And if it was too heavy, the person went to hell. And if it was exactly equal, from this, the person lived a good life and would go to heaven, or to whatever it was that the Egyptians considered heaven. But this is all outlaid in the Book of the Dead that was written during the period of Amenemop III. So that's where we are. Any questions, any comments?
Okay, I just wanted to say, if my heart is heavy, that means it's a little different.
If your heart, exactly. So that's what they, when they talk about.
I think that's an English metaphor from the early English.
I know, I'm just saying.
Egyptian days.
Coincidence or?
I not.
But the heavy heart was a part of that whole thing. For this, yes, Suzanne.
I'm sitting here and thinking the Orthodox.
We've lost you, Suzanne. Hold on.
Comes straight from God. They're not going to like this.
Why would they like it at all?
That's true.
No, don't forget, if they're Rashiists from this and they believe that it was actually written by Moses.
That's true. So it all comes together.
Right, in some bizarre way. So.
And I wanted to say also, I see your slide. If you want to, you can come on the 9th and listen to me do the last part of the book and follow, going to be hard, follow Debbie from last week.
Ah, yes.
Yes. Yes.
But Kugel weighs in on some of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I still can't fathom how Kugel does all that, says what he says in his books, and is yet supposedly an observant Orthodox Jew. I don't get it with him.
Right.
Right.
Any last questions or comments?
Thank you. This was very good.
Well, I mean, this is a very difficult thing to talk about from this about, is it authentically ours? Is it, is it part of this whole genre of wisdom literature that came from literally all over the world?
But that doesn't make it any less amazing and less ours.
Yeah, I agree with Suzanne.
Yeah, I don't think it matters. I don't care.
No.
Whether we got it from various places or not. This is what we have.
Thank you so much, Sue. That's a lot of work, and I appreciate
You're welcome. You're welcome. So next time from this, we're going to be delving into some specific proverbs, and we're also going to be taking a look at particularly how Proverbs was a big part of Pirkei Avot.
Mm-hmm.
And we're actually heading into the period of time now where we should be studying Pirkei Avot anyway. So as we get ready for the high holidays. Any last announcements? Any last?
No, but thank you a lot.
Aaron's on his 5 this afternoon.
Really was wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Final Russian juries this afternoon at 5.
Okay, very good. And then we have the Kugel book in a couple of weeks, and you'll get all of that. I guess that's it. Please, y'all stay safe and healthy. Stay safe and healthy.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you all for your help. Bye-bye.
Noodle Kugel, potato Kugel, or carrot Kugel.
Noodle. Dennis, my lady on phase noodle Kugel.
Is it Kugel?
Hey, I was watching a cooking show last night on PBS on Polish cooking, and then she talked about Kugel in some part of the Holy Cross region of Poland, but they made so this potato Kugel, but made with sausage, which had pork in it, and butter. So a little different recipe for potato kugel.
Yes.
Well, we know where they got it from.
Well,
no
she
doubt
said
about
it got it from the Jews, but
Right.
it was obviously adapted.
It's kugel, kegel, or pudding, depending on where it comes from.
It kind of fits with what we're talking about, who got it first, you know?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, it does. You're right.
You have to ask the ancient housewives who didn't keep records.
Yes, was it cultural appropriation, and if so, in which direction?
And they all lit a candle before they did it anyway.
Okay, and also I just want to mention that it is all due to the potato, which only at that point grew in certain regions. So that would be the proto recipe.
The potato had to come from Peru.
We can't have potatoes in Egypt. We know that.
So maybe it was all in Ireland? Is that what we're saying?
No, they got it from Peru also.
Correct. Lots of potatoes in Peru, that's true.
That's true.
Well, you know, the Yiddish folk song Bulbus talks about making a potato kugel on Shabbos.
Bulbus. Yeah,
Bulbus. Gonna stick and by stick Bulbus. Shabbos in the oven is a Bulbus kugel.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Love it. All right, y'all.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Very good.
Take care.
Especially this last discussion. Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome.
See you online.
Yes, absolutely.
See you all.
Bye-bye.
Take care, be
Somebody
well.
see you later.
All right.
So I have a question, a Tachlis question. Why was the password so weird? Why can't they just change the password to something like Proverbs or something?
I would say the same. Strange are the ways of Shalom administration.
Actually, it makes it much harder to hack. And 2 weeks ago with Aaron's class. Oh,
yeah. Well, that was because the link to Aaron's class without a password was put on the CBS website in March, and it was still there. So anybody going to the CBS website could find that link. But to change the password and to have a waiting room, you know, I mean, those things are but you can't copy and paste the password. You got to put them side by side and sort of do it. It took me like 3 or 4 times to get that password right.
I was able to copy and paste. So.
I think you can copy and paste passwords, but in any case.
Yesterday, I went to a shacharit in memory of Rabbi David Cooper, who wrote the book God is a Verb, and the password for the session was God is a Verb.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, and there was a waiting room. So I think it's possible to make it a little bit simpler. And I'd like to know how you copy and paste, because I tried copying, right-click and copying, and then paste, and it won't
Yeah,
work.
I did too. It didn't work.
So anyway, but glad to be here. Thank you, Sue. You did a great job.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I hope you come to the next class too.
Yeah, I've got it on my calendar. If I'm around, I will.
Did I send you the quiz from last week?
You did.
Oh, good. Okay. So you're up to date now. You're up to date.
I'm as good as I can be up to date. You guys have a great day.
Thanks, you
Everybody
too.
have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Thanks for your inputs, Sandra, also.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for leading us. It was really expertly done as usual. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, by the way, I was at, she's gone.
Fun. Lisa, were you going to say something?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
All right. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
All right. And
I'm signing off.
I'm signing off in just a moment. I may combine the August class and go a little bit longer.
Oh, okay.
So that we don't interfere with the high holidays.
And then high holy days. What are the days? Let's just have a quick look. High holy days are Shabbos,
it's the
Rosh Hashanah is on the 19th of September.
And the 27th is actually Kol Nidre. And the second day of Rosh Hashanah is the 20th, when we would have been having the class anyway.
Right.
So I think if we just maybe go like an hour and a half for the next class, and we'll just end it there. And then in October, I guess Peter can start.
So he can start in October.
That's great.
Okay, we'll just have to let him know.
Sounds good to me.
It seems like he's working on it, so.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
Okay.
Thanks
Take
again.
care. Very good. Excellent.
Great. Thanks a lot. You take care.
Super.
Bye.